Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Sarasvate Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vashrajadesha Tarine Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadada Shivasadi Gaura Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 87, Prayers by the Personified Vedas, text 20, translation, purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It's very loud, huh? Maybe we can turn this off. Svakrita Pureshvamishva Bari Antara Sangvaranam Svakrita Pureshvamishva Svakrita Pureshvamishva Bahirantara Sangvaranam Svakrita Pureshvamishva Bahirantara Sangvaranam Tava Purushang Varantya Akila Shakti Dritung Shakritam Tava Purushang Varantya Akila Shakti Dritung Shakritam Itin Rigatim Vivichya Kavayo Nigamavapanam Itin Rigatim Vivichya Kavayo Nigamavapanam Bhavata upasatingrim abhavam bhuvi vishvasita Bhavata upasatingrim abhavam bhuvi vishvasita Svakrita pureshvamishva bahirantara sangvaranam Svakrita pureshvamishva bahirantara sangvaranam Tava Purushang Varantya Kila Shakti Dretung Shakritam Tava Purushang Varantya Kila Shakti Dretung Shakritam Itin Rigatim Vivichya Kavayo Nigamavapanam Itin Rigatim Vivichya Kavayo Nigamavapanam Bhavata upasatingrim abhavam bhuvi vishvasita Sva by himself Krita created Pureshu in the bodies Amishu these Abahi not externally Antara or internally Sangvaranam whose factual envelopment Tava your Purusham living entity Vadanti the Vedas say Akila of all Shakti energies Dritaha of the possessor Angsha as the expansion. Kritam manifested. Iti in this manner. Nre of the living entity. Gatim the status. Vivichya ascertaining. Kavayaha learned sages. Nigama of the Vedas. Avapanam, the field in which all offerings are sown. Bhavataha, you are. Upasati, they worship. Angrim, the feet. Abhavam, which cause the cessation of material existence. Bhuvi, on the earth. Vishvasita, having developed faith. Translation: the individual living entity, while inhabiting the material bodies he has created for himself by his karma, actually remains uncovered by either gross or subtle metta. This is so because, as the Vedas describe, he is part and parcel of you, the possessor of all potencies. Having determined this to be the status of the living entity, learned sages become imbued with faith and worship your lotus feet, to which all Vedic sacrifices in this world are offered and which are the source of liberation.
Индивидуално същество, докато живее в материалните тела, които е създало за себе си чрез своята карма, в действителност остава непокрито нито от грубата или финната материя. Това е така, защото, както Ведите описват, той е част от Бог, от теб, притежателят на всички енергии. Установявайки това като статутът на живото същество, учените мъдреци са изпълнени с вяра и обожават твоето лотосово нозе, към които ведическите жертвоприношения в този свят са насочени и които са източник на освобождение.
Purport. Not only does the Supreme Lord remain totally uncontaminated when he resides within the material bodies of the conditioned souls, but even the infinitesimal jiva souls are never directly touched by the coverings of ignorance and lust they acquire while passing through repeated cycles of birth and death.
Пояснение. Не само Върховният Бог остава изцяло незамърсен, когато обитава в материалните тела на обосновените души, но дори и незначителните джива души никога директно не са докосвани от покритията на невежеството и похота, които те придобиват, докато преминават през повтарящият се цикъл на раждане и смърт. Така, cycle of birth and death.
Thus, the Taittiriya Upanishad 3.10.5 proclaims, Sayaschaham purushe yascha chasavaditye saekaha, the soul of the embodied living being is one with him who stands within the sun.
Така, Тайтирия Упанишад 3.10.5 заявява, душата на въплътеното същество е едно с него, който стои в слънцето.
Similarly, the Chandogya Upanishad 6.8.7 teaches Tattvam Asi, you are not different from that supreme truth.
Така и Чандогя Упанишад учи Tattvam Asi, ти не се различаваш от тази върховна истина.
In this prayer, the personified Vedas refer to the finite enjoyer of material bodies, the Jiva soul, as an expansion of the transcendental reservoir of all potencies, the Supreme Lord.
Тази молитва описват ограниченият наслаждаващи на материалните тела, дживата, като разширение на трансценденталното вместилище на всички енергии Върховния Бог.
The term Eng-Blg, made as his portion, must be properly understood, however, in this context.
Терминът Амшакритам, направени като негова част, трябва да бъдат правилно разбрани в този контекст.
The jiva is not created at any time, nor is he the same kind of expansion of the Lord as the omnipotent Vishnu Tattva expansions.
Душата, джива, не е създадена в никакъв момент от времето, нито пък е от същия вид разширение на Бога, както и всемогъщите Вишну Татва разширения.
The Supreme Soul is the proper object of all worship, and the subordinate Jiva Soul is meant to be his worshipper.
Върховната душа е подходящият обект за цялото обожание или обектът за обожание от другите, а душата, подчинената душа е предназначена да бъде негов обожател.
The Supreme Lord enacts his pastimes by showing himself in innumerable aspects of his personality, whereas the jiva is forced to change bodies whenever his accumulated karmic reactions so dictate.
Върховният Бог извършва своите забавления, като разкрива себе си в безброй аспекти на неговата личност, докато душата джива е принудена да сменя телата си, когато натрупа кармични последици, които го принуждават.
According to Sri Narada Pancharatra, Yat tatastang tuchid rupam svasang vedyad vinirgatam ranjitam gunaragena sajiva iti katyate. The marginal potency who is spiritual by nature, who emanates from the self-cognizant Sambit energy and who becomes tainted by his attachment to the modes of material nature is called the jiva.
Нарада Панчарата се казва, междинната енергия, която е духовната природа и произлезе от себеосъзнатата енергия Самвит и която става замърсена чрез привързаността си към гуните на материалната природа, се нарича джива.
Although the jiva soul is also an expansion of Lord Krishna, he is distinguished from Krishna's independent Vishnu expansions by his constitutional position on the margin between spirit and matter.
Макар душата джива да също да е разширение на Бог Кришна, тя се различава от независимите експанзии на Кришна, Вишну, чрез които по своята изначална позиция като междинна между духът и материята.
As the Mahavaraha Purana explains, Svang shas chata vibinangsha iti dvidasa ishyate angshino yatu sang martyam yat svarupam yatastitihi tadeva nanu matropi bedang svang shashino kvachit vibidangshol shakti syat kinchit samarta matra yuk. The Supreme Lord is known in two ways in terms of his plenary expansions and his separated expansions.
Mahavaraha Purana се казва, Върховният Бог е разбиран по два начина, според неговите пълни експанзии и неговите отделени експанзии. Между пълните разширения и източник на разширенията всъщност никога няма съществена разлика от гледна точка на техните способности, форми или положения.
Between the plenary expansions and their source of expansions, there is never any essential difference in terms of either their capabilities, forms, or situations. The separated expansions, on the other hand, possess only minute potency, being endowed only to a small extent with the Lord's powers.
Отделените разширения от друга страна притежават само ограничена сила, тъй като са надарени само с малка част от могъществото на Бога.
The conditioned souls in this world appears as if covered by matter internally as well as externally.
Обусловената душа в този свят изглежда изглежда, сякаш е покрита от материята вътрешно, а също и външно.
Externally, gross matter surrounds him in the forms of his body and environment, while internally desires and aversion impinge upon his consciousness.
Външно грубата материя го заобикаля под формата на неговото тяло и околната среда, докато вътрешно желанието и омразата покриват неговото съзнание.
But from the transcendental perspective of realized sages, both kinds of material covering are insubstantial.
Но от трансценденталната перспектива на осъзнатите мъдреци и двата вида материални покривки са несъществени.
Biologically eliminating all material identities, which are misconceptions based on the soul's gross and subtle coverings, a thoughtful person can determine that the soul is nothing material.
Като логически премахва всички материални идентичности, които са погрешни представи, основани на грубите и фини покрития на душата, един мислещ човек и мъдър човек ще определи, че душата не е нищо материално.
Rather, he is a pure spark of divine spirit, a servant of the supreme Godhead.
Всъщност е чиста искрица на божествен дух или слуга на Върховния Бог.
Understanding this, one should worship the Supreme Lord's lotus feet. Such worship is the fully bloomed flower of the tree of Vedic rituals.
Разбирайки това, човек трябва да обожава Божеството име на Бога. Такова обожание е разцъфналото цвете на дървото на ведическите ритуали.
One's realization of the splendor of the Lord's lotus feet, gradually nourished by the offering of Vedic sacrifices, automatically bears the fruit of liberation from material existence and irrevocable faith in the Lord's mercy.
Осъзнаването на великолепието на лотосовите лозе на Бога, постепенно подхранвано от предлаганията на ведическите жертви, автоматично раждат плодовете на освобождението от материалното съществуване и неотклонната вяра в милостта на Бога.
One can accomplish all this while still living in the material world.
Човек може да постигне това, докато още е в този материален свят.
As Lord Krishna states in the Gopala Tapani Upanishad Uttara 47, Mathura Mandale Yastu Jambudvipestito Taha Yor Chayet Pratimam Prati Same Priyataro Bhuvi. One who worships me in my deity form while living in the district of Mathura or indeed anywhere in Jambudvip becomes dear to me in this world.
Както Бог Кришна казва в Гопала Tapani Upanishad, човек, който ме обожава като моето мурти, моята форма на мурти, докато живея в Матура или всъщност навсякъде, където е в Джамбудвипа, става много скъп на мен в този свят.
Srila Swami prays, Tvat angshasya mameshanatvan maya krita bandhanam tvat angri sevam adishya parananda nivartaya. My Lord, please free me, your partial expansion from the bondage created by your Maya. Please do this, O abode of supreme bliss, by directing me to the service of your lotus feet.
Мой Господи, моля те, освободи ме, Твоето частично разширение от оплитането, създадено от Твоята Мая. Моля ти, направи това, о мистерище на върховно блаженство, като ме насочваш към служенето на Твоите лозе.
Swakrita Pureshva Mishva Bahir Antarasam Varanam Tava Purushang Varantyakhila Shakti Dritong Shakritam Itinrigatim Vivichya Kavayoni Gamavapanam Bhavata Upasatengrim Abhavam Bhuvi Vishvasitaha. The individual living entity, while inhabiting the material bodies he has created for himself by his karma, actually remains uncovered by either gross or subtle matter.
Индивидуалното живо същество Естеството обитава материалните тела, които е създало чрез своята карма, всъщност остава непокрито нито от грубата, нито от фината материя.
This is so because, as the Vedas describe, he is part and parcel of you, the possessor of all potencies.
Както Ведите описват, това е така, защото той е част от теб, притежателят на всички енергии.
Having determined this to be the status of the living entity, learned sages become imbued with faith and worship your lotus feet, to which all the Vedic sacrifices in this world are offered, and which are the source of liberation.
Разбирайки, че това е положението на живите същества, учените мъдреци са изпълнени с вяра и уважават твоите лотосонозе, към които всички ведически жертви в този свят са насочени и които са източник на освобождение.
So, this is mysterious.
Това е мистериозно.
That the living entity, although within the material body, actually is not covered by the body.
Че живото същество, макар да е в тяло, всъщност не е покрито от тялото.
How is this possible?
Как е възможно?
So, one example also that is given, if you try to, or you put together oil and water, they don't mix.
Единият пример, който се дава, е смесването на олио с вода. Те всъщност не се докосват.
So, imagine the living entity is a drop of oil.
Да си представим, че живото същество е като капка олио.
And you throw that little drop of oil into a big recipient, or how you call it, a bathtub of water. It's like an ocean for the drop.
Капвате това олио в един резервоар на вода.
But the drop will not mix, it will just be floating, and you can, in one sense, if you know how, you could take it out again.
И капката няма да се смеси с водата и в известен смисъл, ако знаете как може да я извадите отново.
So in this is one example one can imagine. If we are like the drop of oil, water actually never affects the drop.
Това е един пример. Да знаем, както капката мазнина не се докосва или не е засегнана от водата.
But, of course, one can be surrounded by water.
Но разбира се, може да бъдем заобиколени от вода.
And if you came out of a bottle of oil, you're not there, you are in a different environment.
И ако излезеш от бутилката с олио, вече не си там, си в отделно окръжение.
So the spirit soul in one sense is like that. We are surrounded by an ocean of material energy.
Ти си в чужда среда. По същия начин ние, живите същества, сме в океан от материална енергия.
Scientifically one can, that's also Mayavadi conception, that ultimately it's all one. It's not the different forms we see, so scientifically it's all just atoms combining in different ways.
Научно погледнато, за материя е просто атоми, които се комбинират по различни начини. Това казват и Майявадите. Всичко е едно.
That's how far I could understand science, isn't it? It's atoms, from the atomic point of view, all atoms are the same, no?
От атомична гледна точка всички атоми са едни и същи.
And then they become molecules, right? Different types of... How does that work? If the atoms are all the same, how do they become different by combining in a different way? The different combinations make a different kind of material element? Yes, no?
Depending on the electrons and the
atoms,
one positive, one negative.
So it's all 1 and 0, like in computer science.
Yes.
So ultimately it's all 1 or all 0, depending either Shunyavadi or Mayavadi.
It's energy. It's Mayavadi. There is some energy.
There's some energy. So it's actually Shunyavadi doesn't exist.
Yes.
So you try to explain that.
Всъщност, или е Шунявади, пустотата, или пък Майявади, всичко е едно, всичко е една енергия.
But even the matter that we see, the different forms, they're all formed by, you could say, one substance, which is it's the Mahat Tattva, the Pradhana, which then, combining in different ways, appears as if, like there's a difference between earth and water and fire and ether, like that, right?
Всъщност, материята, която ние възприемаме като различни форми, всъщност произлиза от една субстанция, една първоначална енергия, която постепенно еволюира и се развива в различни видове енергия, като земя, вода, огън и така.
So then, besides that, there's another energy. That's what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, the apara and the para, prakriti, or prakriti means nature.
Но освен тази природа, материалната има и друга, по-висша, казва Кришна в Бхагавад Гита, друга пракрати, висша.
So the little drop of oil, that's the para prakriti, the superior energy, and the apara, the inferior, is all the water which can surround the drop but doesn't really affect in one sense.
И капката олио е тази висша енергия, пара пракрати, докато водата, която го заобикаля, е материята, която всъщност не го засяга реално.
Now we can think about this example further. Let's imagine that the water freezes. What happens then to the drop? It really is trapped within the ice.
Да си представим, че водата замръзна и какво се случва с капката олио, тя е затворена в леда.
And it's cold.
Yes.
So that may also be, depending where you are in the material world, you feel like it's and you feel like but it's not really affecting. The drop still does not mix. It's all mental. It's an impression, an imagination, which is not really ultimately true.
Това е, което ни се случва в материалния свят. Може да се чувстваме засегнати и да изпитваме страдания, но всъщност това е в нашия ум и е въображаемо.
So this is a mysterious situation. I was saying in the beginning that while inhabiting a material body, one actually remains uncovered by this very thing that you are inhabiting.
Но всъщност, докато пребивава в тялото, душата не е покрита от материалното тяло, от самото тяло, в което тя се намира.
Even the subtle body is not. We're not covered. I mean, we don't really mix with it.
Дори финното тяло не сме истински покрити или не се смесваме с него.
So then it says here, then once one understands this, the learned sages here, they become imbued with faith and they worship the lotus feet of the Lord.
И когато учените мъдреци осъзнаят това, те се изпълват с вяра и започват да обожават нозете на Бога.
Well, we can, yes, if you think about it, it's actually, as soon as you really understand that I'm not matter, that's a liberating experience.
Веднага, щом осъзнавам, че не сме материята, това е преживяване, което освобождава.
So then we have again the situation that although we may understand it, still there's this identification, which means illusion.
Но макар и да разбираме това, идентификацията и отъждествяването не остава, което означава, че сме в илюзия.
One theoretically understands, I'm not this body. But still, when one is acting in many times, in many ways, one acts as if I'm the body.
Теоретично разбираме, че не сме тялото, но на практика действаме като че ли сме тялото.
So for this theoretical knowledge to become realized knowledge, that's a whole process.
И това теоретично знание да се превърне в реализирано знание има подходящ процес.
And here, well, the learned sages, they begin this with worshipping the Lord, who is the source of liberation.
И тук мъдреците дават пример с това как обожават Бога, който е източник на всичко и даряващо освобождение.
That's why Krishna Bhagavad Gita, he recommends only actually 4 things, which perhaps is so easy. Man mana bhava mad bhakto mad yaji mam namaskuru. You do 4 things. You think of me, you become my devotee, you worship me, you offer obeisances, and if you do that properly, then you come to me.
Și Prabhupada каза, че Кришна препоръчва нещо много просто. Само 4 неща, ако ги правим правилно, мислим за него, стане много, правилно отдаваме почет и го обожаваме, тогава ще се върнем при него.
So, it's not difficult.
Всъщност не е трудно.
But the illusion, and that's also mentioned here, it covers the consciousness. Although one has nothing to do with it, still, that's what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita also, that this is so strong that it's duratyaya. You become covered. Although you are uncovered, you are covered. It's very weird.
Макар че всъщност не сме покрити, сме докоснати от материята, ние сме в илюзия, защото се намираме под нейното влияние.
Yes, and that small drop of oil can't just jump back by itself into the bottle of oil. It has to be taken out by some superior power. So the Lord, He is therefore the source of liberation, and also in Bhagavad Gita, the one who is like the liberator from the ocean of birth and death, the one who, like, therefore we have, if you don't have this, there's no way you can be taken out. Ladies have no problem. They have more than enough. They can be taken from any side. We only have one place you can...
Той трябва да ни издърпа и трябва да имаме нещо, за което да ни хвани някой коса, поне малко шика. Няма проблем, те могат да бъдат хванати от много места.
Well, he made a trick. So if you don't take me here, you can take me there. That also works. It's a little more painful. But better something than nothing. Some also let them grow like this, It doesn't matter where. Only the Buddhists, they really have a problem. Therefore they just go shunya, nothing, not even one drop of hair. Or what is it called, the Naga Babas, naked, so then, but they have a lot of hair, so... Anyway, so the whole point is that the drop by itself cannot liberate. You cannot liberate yourself. Like if, you're tied up, how can you liberate yourself? Somebody has to come to untie you.
Въпросът е, че не може сами да се освободим като капката вода, капката олио във водата, нито пък ако сме вързани, сами може да се развържим.
So let's see what more we have here. So there, yes, although the Vedas sometimes, this is another mystery, the one and difference at the same time. The Chandogya Upanishad may say Tattvamasi, you are non-different from the Supreme Truth, but simultaneously we are non-different and also different. Taittiriya Upanishad is mentioned also that the soul or the living being is one with him who stands within the sun. So it looks like there's no difference. So therefore in one of the previous verses we had this point that the Vedas, they're saying different things. So sometimes then those who emphasize the personal aspect, they wanted to speak very quickly so nobody becomes confused. So this should, therefore, one has to understand the Vedic literature properly with the help of realized souls. So, let's see. So yes, the conditioned soul appears as if covered by matter, but the realized sages, they understand that this material covering is actually insubstantial.
И обикновената душа изглежда, че е покрита от материята, но осъзналите се души разбират, че всъщност тази покривка няма субстанция.
Yes, therefore sometimes one can say, and Prabhupada says this, you can become Krishna conscious within a second.
Затова и се казва понякога Шрила Прабхупада. Казва, че човек може да стане Кришна осъзнат за един миг.
It's a matter of consciousness. As soon as one understands one's real position, then in that very moment one is practically liberated.
В момента, в който човек осъзнае своето истинско положение, е освободен.
And although one may say, but that person still has a material body and living in the material world, still it's called a jivan muktan, somebody who is liberated, although still apparently living in the material world.
И въпреки, че такава се познава се душа, има тяло и в материалния свят, се нарича дживан мукта, т.е. освободена, макар да се намира тук.
Yes, the example is the dry coconut that may be the pulp within the shell of the coconut, but it's actually detached. So if you shake it, it makes a sound.
Примерът е с сухият кокос и неговата вътрешната месечна част е изсъхнала, се отделила ядката и затова е непривързана. И когато го разклатим, се чува.
So the self-realized soul is like that, although still surrounded by matter, but is not identified.
Осъзнатата душа, познавата си душа е така. Тя макар и да е окръжена от материята, не се идентифицира с нея.
It's not attached. We talk about attachment and detachment. So you think about the pulp of the coconut. When it's attached, it's like almost like one. It's very difficult, and you try to take it out. It's not an easy thing. But once it dries up, then it naturally detaches from the shell.
Е привързана, се отделила тази ядката на кокоса. Когато е привързана, е много трудно да бъде махната, но когато изсъхне, естествено се отделя.
So as soon as one dries up all material attachments and desires and hankerings and lamentations, then one is called on the Brahma Bhuta platform, beyond the three modes of material nature.
Когато присушим нашите материални привързаности, желанията си, омразата си, тогава се считаме за отвъд влиянието на трите години на Брахма Бhuta нивото.
So that's the whole process of Bhakti-yoga, to dry up these things, become detached from the shell, and then it doesn't matter where you live.
Това се състои процеса на Бхакти-йога, да изсушим привързаностите и да се отделим както ядката на кокоса, без значение къде се намираме.
Any comments, questions? You always save the day.
So one can become Krishna conscious in 1
Second. Yes.
But then also
One can go into Maya in 1 second.
In 1 second.
Half a second. Yeah, sure. Therefore it was mentioned, between matter and spirit. That kind of position, it's not a physical place, but it's possible all the time.
И възможно да станем Кришна съзнателни един миг и също падне в Майя за един миг. Примерът, който се дава е, че сме на междинната позиция между материята и духа. Това не е физическо място, но това е нашето положение. Винаги може да правим избор.
I mean, in the independence, this tiny little bit of independence, that's part of our nature. Krishna's Swarat, completely independent, so we are as part and parcels. So but it's sufficient to make the wrong choice.
Кришна е Сварат, той е напълно независим и като частици от него ние също имаме частична независимост И тя е малка, но е достатъчно да направи погрешен избор.
And don't complain about having this independence.
Не трябва да се оплакваме, че имаме тази независимост.
Because you could argue, why do I have this, unfortunate choice? If I wouldn't have, I would be safe.
И ние може да спорим това, да кажем, защо трябва да имам този нещастен избор. Ако нямах, ще да съм спасен.
No, it's a thought one may have.
Може да си мислим.
It's not really my fault. It's the fault of the Creator who gave me this independence so I can make the wrong move. So if He would have created me in a different way, I can't do the wrong move, then everything would be fine.
Защо аз трябва да съм виновен? Създателят е виновен, че ми е дал тази независимост да мога да сгреша. Ако не беше така, нямаше да сгреша и нямаше да страдам.
So, what would you say to that argument?
Какво ще говоря? It's his fault.
It's his fault, of course.
Той
Is it? So, if he wouldn't, let's say, okay, I'll grant you your wish. No more independence.
Да кажеш, ще ти изпълня желанието, вече нямаш независимост.
You're safe now.
Сега си спасен.
So, yes, no?
Да, не.
You take the offer? It's free, huh? You don't have to pay.
Ще приема ли това предложение? Безплатно.
Maybe yes, yes. What's wrong with it? Why actually this is not a good idea?
Какво не е наред? Защо не е добра идея? Krishna appreciates our love through free choice. Not by
So just think about you. You have a partner maybe, and imagine that it's impossible for that other person to ever make a choice. He's condemned to love you.
Който няма шанс в вечността да направи избор и обречен да ни обича.
Is that satisfying?
Robotic love.
Yes, exactly.
Programmed to love.
Yeah, it's programmed. You can.
Always love.
Yeah. Then, then you question: Does he really love me? He has no choice. So that's exactly the point. If you have no choice, then what is the meaning of this so-called love? It has to be voluntarily. Then it becomes meaningful, isn't it? Yeah. So therefore, no, don't worry. Our nature is it's fixed. Because Krishna is Svarat. I mean, that's another argument, of course. He is independent. So we are as part and parcels by nature, naturally. And it's, if you again think about it, what's happening in the world, people sacrifice their life for so-called independence. How many battles have been fought for independence? Freedom. Yeah. And then the one who was leading in the battle, he gets a monument on a horse. He's the liberator. In Bolivia, you have Bolivar. And who knows? Everywhere there's a Plaza de la Independencia. The Independence Square. What they have in America, Independence Hall. Something like that, no? And they have the 4th of July. What is it? Liberty. That's right. It's not the statue of slavery, And it's glorified. Yes, we like to be slaves. Even the slaves, big fights all the time. The colonies. then they call it protectorate. You know, I mean, the rascals. We are protecting you. You know? Yeah, we are so much protected. We want to get free. You know? How they have this picture of somebody, how you say, how you call it? If you, by your force, you cut the chains, not by some machine, you know. No, you go like Hercules, you know, or Schwarzenegger. And then, you know, freedom. You know. So that's the nature.
We have it expression in Bulgaria also, the dependence movement, freedom or death.
That's right. So people are taking the risk of death for freedom. And only those who are either very much tamasic or very weak, they will say, okay, you know, and then I'll become a slave, but at least I have some, I mean, I survive somehow or other. There's no death, at least no death.
Или тези, които са проблематични, или които са твърде слаби, те се примиряват с робството и казват, добре, с робство, но поне имам какво да ям и съм жив.
But then, you know, what kind of life is this?
Тогава какъв е този живот?
So it's worth fighting and taking the risk for become free.
Трябва да се освободи.
That's the truth. It's all everywhere, not just here. You go to any country. It's always the same story. All right, anything else?
In that sense, it's so difficult to explain to people that our goal in Bhakti-yoga is to become servants or slaves. That's the acharyas.
That's another mystery. Another mystery, yes, it's full of mysteries. Yes, because, well, that's another aspect. Actually, you're never independent. Right? Because they're so small, that's the whole thing. So because we are so small, therefore either you are dependent, because yes, on the material energy or on the spiritual energy. That's the choice. That's the only choice.
Сме толкова малки, сме винаги зависими или от материалната, или от духовната енергия. Това всъщност не е избор. Това е свободата.
So if we think, and that's the whole, you know, now we have thought about this so-called independence in this world, that's relatively speaking, you are enslaved by whoever. You want to be free, but anybody, even those who are the so-called masters, they're also slaves of material nature, but they don't realize it.
Дори тези, които са господари в този свят, са всъщност роби на материалната енергия, макар и да не го осъзнават.
So that requires a superior vision to understand that. As long as we have no idea of our own constitutional position about another world, all that, as I said, you know, if this is the only world, it's the only life, then yes, in that context, you think you are free and freedom and you risk your life and this and that. But if you look from a different perspective, things change.
Да, ако си мислиш, че няма душа и няма повече реалност, всичко е материя и живота е един и се бориш за свобода, тогава оставаш в тази заблуда, че си свободен, но всъщност, ако погледнеш от друга перспектива, има и друга реалност.
Yeah, in that lower vision, you mistake that you think you can do whatever you like.
По-нищата перспектива, ние допускаме грешка, но си мислим, че може да правим каквото си поискаме.
And the limitations that are imposed by material nature, you just accept as normal.
И ние приемаме за нормални ограниченията, наложени от материята.
That's life.
Това е живот.
That's the conclusion. C'est la vie.
Това е заключението. Какъв е живот?
And that's a fact. Life is like that, so we have accepted it. We have suffering, and you have this, and you have death, and you have old age and disease, and that's life. and to make some adjustment, then you will say, unless you have that, then you cannot appreciate happiness.
И ако не го приеме това нещо, няма как да оценим щастие.
You have to have pain to appreciate pleasure.
Трябва да изпитаме болка, за да оценим удоволствието.
And therefore, from another angle, then the scripture says that so-called happiness is just a reduction of suffering. And then you think, you're drowning, you're practically suffocating, and then you come out and you take some air and you think, this is great. This is super.
От една страна, и аз не казвам, че така нареченото щастие тук е изчезването и намаляването на страданието, както човек, който се дава, на практика се задушава, няма въздух, но когато си го поеме, си казва, това е страхотно.
Or whatever it may be. Something imposed by material nature, the body is undergoing discomfort or suffering, and when there's alleviation, then this is fantastic.
И когато, материалната природа ни наложи някаква болест, болка и има облегчение, ние си казваме, това е фантастично.
Like people who live in the city, the whole week, and traffic, and this and that, and there's always this noise, which is constant, practically, even consciously or unconsciously, and you're suffering from that. Stress, it's called stress.
Големите градове, такъв трафик, замърсяване и то постоянен шум, който в крайна сметка води до стрес.
And then they come here. And then they take a walk, and then there's no car, no siren, no screams, no nothing. Maybe some bird somewhere, maybe some horse going, some distant cow with a bell. And this is fantastic. But this is actually normal. This is the normal life. But they think they have to experience the suffering, and then if it's alleviated, this is my pleasure. But actually, no. So the point is, slave. You're anyway a slave. You have accepted this as a normal condition. Even to inhabitate, let's take that word, you're inhabiting a body, you're enslaved. As we always, point out, there are so many things the body is demanding that you cannot say no. If you have to go, the call of nature, well, you have no choice, really. If you say, no, I'm not going to go, then you're going to pee right there into your pants. You cannot say, no, I don't, I'm from now on, it's a botheration. I'm stopping to pee. Or even sleeping for some, especially those who are very creative. It happens, they stop eating sometimes. They're working on some painting or some composition or whatever they do, and they don't eat, they practically don't sleep just to get something which they have this idea they want to create something. And ideally, if you're like that, you don't sleep at all and you don't eat at all. You just create. So because it's not possible, the body will, it cannot function. So then you have to eat something, though. Therefore you grab some sandwich while you're still with one hand painting, you're eating with the other. Yeah, they do like this. And have a quick sip and then continue. Right? And It goes to the extreme that they had this one case in South Korea. The guy was so absorbed in the game that he forgot to drink for 3 days and just dropped dead.
Има и такива крайности, както в Южна Корея. Момчето толкова било вглъбено в играта, че забрал да пие 3 дни и накрая умрял.
You're a slave. You can't say it to the body. I have no time. You know, I'm killing all these magicians and monsters and you know. So how can I drink? It's not possible. And you tell the body, shut up. You know, and the body says, okay, I'm closing down. So you're a slave. You are forced. Normally we are forced to eat, we are forced to sleep and drink, whatever. So, you know, what is your freedom? And depending on the body, it can be very uncomfortable. So therefore now the Vedas tell you, well, there's a different type of body where these problems are really solved. But you have to become a slave of the Lord. Now you have your choice. You become the slave of the Lord or you become the slave of his governante, you know, the lady with the stick called Maya Devi. Бога директно или на неговата гувернантка, жената с пръчката Майя. We all can imagine somebody like, you know, this big, heavy lady, you know. Put on your shoes. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, this is maybe 100 years ago, but we all know what it means. And if not, it's a little more subtle. Material nature is personified by Maya, but you know, the stick, she has a trident. It's a little more sophisticated. And a sword, and a this. I mean, how many? 10 arms, I think, with so many weapons. And we are the trident, you know. There's Adi Bhautika, there's Adi Atmika, and Adi Daivika. There's threefold miseries. So whatever way you look at it, we are going to be slaves. Както и да погледнем, ще сме роби. Тя има това трезъвец, които са тристранните страдания. По всякакъв начин ние сме зависими. This word is not so nice. So let's say under the control of some superior force. It's a little more scientific, you know. Yeah, not the whip, you know, of this. Whip, yes, but let's call it something else, and it doesn't sound so, you know, terrible. But the result is the same. We are forced. So then we have a choice. What force do I accept as being my forcing me? Now the difference is, and that's the difference, Krishna really doesn't force. No, it's a voluntary relationship. And then, well, that's now going beyond that. The mystery is that Krishna actually can become your slave. That's really inconceivable. Then the lady with the stick is Mother Yashoda. And Krishna goes like this and cries and runs away. But it's not like in this world. That's another mystery. It's completely different. It's all full of bliss. So there's two ladies with the stick.
Така че две жени с пръчка.
In the spiritual world, it's the source of supreme pleasure. In the material world, it's the source of intense suffering.
Духовният свят е източник на безкрайно блаженство, в материалния на огромно страдание.
So, that's your choice. So I think we have to stop. I thought I would stop very much earlier, but because we have all these fantastic questions. Okay, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Granthara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Gaura Nitai Gauravani ki